Sometimes the smallest act of kindness leaves a mark so deep it echoes for decades. This is the story of a quiet mechanic, a red scarf forgotten in a winter storm, and a moment that should have been lost to time, but wasn't. If you've ever wondered whether a simple, selfless gesture could change the course of two lives forever, stay with me. Because some things don't rust, some hearts don't forget, and some stories just might find you when you need them most. If this kind of story speaks to you, consider subscribing to our channel. We share heartwarming tales of healing unexpected connections and the quiet power of good people. Now let's begin. Poor mechanic fixed the wrong car. The scarf inside made the owner say you kept it all this time. The first snowfall came early to Elk Hollow that year, powdering the cracked sidewalks and blanketing the tired roofs in a hush of white. Elliot Ward stood just inside the open garage door, a wrench in one hand and a coffee mug chipped and stubbornly warm in the other. The cold air didn't bother him anymore, not the way it used to. Winter had a silence he respected. He took a slow sip as the tow truck pulled up, engine coughing against the cold. The driver hopped out, a younger guy Elliot didn't recognize. "Wrong address," I think the man said, gesturing to the sleek black SUV strapped to the bed. This was supposed to go to Jarvis Auto, but they're closed for some conference. Dispatch said you could handle it. Elliot nodded. "Leave it, I'll take a look." The driver unloaded the SUV and drove off, the rumble of his truck fading into the stillness. Elliot circled the vehicle, clean, nearly spotless aside from a flat front tire and what looked like a dying battery. It was a Lexus, newer model, too polished for a town like this. He reached for the driver's side door and opened it. The interior smelled faintly of lavender and leather. Elegant, almost too perfect. He noticed a slim portfolio on the passenger seat and tucked inside a registration slip, half sticking out. Just enough for him to read the name. L. Maddox. His chest tightened. He stared at the name for a long moment, then closed the door gently, as if afraid to wake something old. Inside the garage, he rolled the SUV onto the lift, working with quiet efficiency. His hands moved with muscle memory, checked the battery, fixed the tire, inspect for deeper issues. All the while, his mind drifted backward. 20 years. He hadn't heard the name Maddox in 20 years. That night was still etched into his bones. The snowstorm. The girl. The way she looked, lost, fragile, like she'd been plucked from another world and dropped into his. She couldn't have been more than 14, wandering alone through the forest edge behind his property. He'd brought her into the garage, bundled her in blankets, given her hot cocoa in that same chipped mug now holding his coffee. She'd said her name was Lena. Just that. No last name, no details. Scared to be found, but more scared to stay invisible. He never forgot. The next morning, he'd driven her to the police station. She climbed into the back of the deputy's car without looking back. Except she had. Just once. Through the window, her hand pressed to the glass. He never knew where she went after that, but he'd kept the scarf. By late afternoon, the sky was turning a pale blue-gray. Elliot was cleaning up when the bell above the garage door jingled softly. He looked up and stilled. She stood there, half lit by the dying sun. A woman in a tailored gray coat, tall boots, hair pulled into a neat twist at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were searching, hesitant, and then recognition flickered. "Elliot," she asked, voice soft but clear. He blinked. His hands were still dirty, smudged with grease. He wiped them on a rag, slowly nodding. She stepped inside, looking around the garage. Her gaze landed on the high shelf near the back, on the old wooden box tucked between oil cans and forgotten tools. Her voice caught. "That box," she said. "Is it still the same?" Elliot stared at her. "You've been here before?" A pause. Her eyes welled up. 20 years ago, she said. "In a snowstorm. You wrapped me in a blanket, made cocoa, and you let me sleep right there." She pointed to the worn leather chair near the space heater. His breath hitched. She stepped forward. "I left my scarf. Red, wool. My foster mom knit it before she—" Her voice cracked. Without a word, Elliot turned, crossed the room, climbed the small ladder, and reached for the box. It was heavier than it used to be. He brought it down, rested it gently on the workbench, and opened the lid. There it was, faded now, dulled by time, but still intact. The red wool scarf folded neatly. He picked it up with care and turned to her. "I didn't mean to keep it," he said, "but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." She took it in her hands, clutching it like something sacred. Her shoulders shook with silent tears. No one ever kept anything of mine. Not before. They sat in silence for a while, the scarf resting between them on the bench. What happened after you left? He asked quietly. She smiled through the tears. They placed me with a new family. I changed my name. Spent a decade trying to outrun everything. Then I remembered you. The cocoa. The warmth. You didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. You just let me be safe. Elliot looked down at his hands. I didn't think I did enough. You did everything, she whispered. Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow. You know, she said after a pause, I started a foundation. For kids like I was. Wayfinder. We help them get back on their feet. Sometimes, I tell them about a man with kind eyes who gave me a chair in cocoa and didn't ask for anything in return. Elliot didn't speak, but his eyes were glassy. She stood up slowly, holding the scarf. I'm staying in town for a few days. Would you have dinner with me sometime? He nodded. I'd like that. She smiled, the kind that held history and hope all at once. As she walked to the door, she turned back. Thank you, she said, for never letting go. And then she was gone. Elliot stood alone in the garage, staring at the spot where she'd been. The old space heater buzzed in the corner. The snow fell slow and steady, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so cold. The next morning came with a rare clarity. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a crisp sky, the color of steel and trees laced with frost. Elliot was already at work, the space heater humming softly in the corner of the garage. He kept glancing at the door, though he wouldn't have admitted why not even to himself. He was halfway through fixing a cranky carburetor when he heard the jingle of the bell again. He didn't look up right away. He wanted to savor the moment in case it was her. When he finally lifted his eyes, she was standing there, framed by the door, like some kind of memory come to life. Her coat was the same tailored gray one from yesterday, but her expression was different, less cautious. There was warmth now, and perhaps something like peace. Hi, she said, voice soft but steadier. I hope I'm not intruding. Elliot set down his wrench and wiped his hands. Not at all. I was just thinking about that scarf. Lena smiled and stepped inside. Me too. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept wondering if I'd imagined it, that it was still there. He gestured toward the wooden box still sitting on the bench. It's been in there since that night. Lena moved toward it, her fingers brushing the edge of the lid. I remember this box. You opened it when you were looking for a blanket or maybe a flashlight. I was cold and scared, but I remember thinking, even the way you moved made me feel safe. Elliot lowered his gaze. Compliments always sat awkwardly with him, like jackets that didn't quite fit. You were just a kid. Anyone would have done the same. She looked at him. No, they wouldn't have. There was a pause, not heavy, just filled with the quiet understanding of two people reconnecting across a chasm of years. I wanted to ask you something, she said after a moment. Do you ever wonder why people come back? Elliot tilted his head. Come back to places, to moments, to people. She shrugged, pulling her coat tighter. I've spent so long building a life that looks nothing like where I came from. And yet here I am, back in Elk Hollow, in your garage. He leaned against the counter. Maybe you come back when you find something that never let go of you. Lena blinked, and for a second her eyes glistened again. She walked toward the old leather chair near the heater, the very spot she'd curled into all those years ago. She ran a hand along the armrest. It's still here. So are you, Elliot replied quietly. They sat for a while in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Elliot made tea. He figured cocoa might feel too symbolic, and handed her a mug with best mechanic in town, barely legible beneath the chips in the ceramic. I tried to find you, Lena said after a few sips. He looked over surprised. You did for years. I went to the sheriff's department. They didn't have a full report. Just said I'd been found then, placed into the system. No record of your name. Just male late 20s garage owner on Maple Lane. That's all. I never gave my name to the officer, Elliot admitted. Didn't think it mattered. Just wanted to make sure you were safe. She stared at him. It mattered to me. A beat passed. The heater clicked softly. Elliot rubbed a hand along the back of his neck. So, you're really Lena Maddox now. I legally changed it when I turned 18. Wanted a fresh start? Took the last name from a street sign I saw the day I left my final foster home. Maddox Street. She gave a crooked smile. Figured it sounded strong. It does. She looked around the garage again. You haven't changed much, you know. Elliot chuckled. I take that as a compliment. You should. In a world that keeps turning upside down, you've stayed. Good. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to being seen not like that. Not beyond the grease-stained hands and quiet manners. And yet here she was, seeing all of him like no one else had in decades. Do you still live alone? She asked gently. He nodded. No family nearby, not anymore. My wife passed 12 years ago. No kids. Just this place. Lena exhaled slowly, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, thank you. A moment passed, and then Lena leaned forward, her eyes meeting his with something new in them. Purpose. I didn't just come to thank you, Elliot. I came because I need your help. He frowned, curious. I run a foundation now, she continued. Wayfinder. It's for kids who've aged out of foster care or who've slipped through the cracks. We give them shelter, training, a second shot. He listened, brow creasing. We've got heart, she added, but not enough hands. I need someone who understands how to teach skills, not just handouts. Someone steady. Someone like you. Elliot blinked, caught off guard. You want me to work with your kids? I want you to change lives. Like you changed mine. He stared at her for a long time. Then he shook his head more to himself than to her. I'm just a mechanic. Lena smiled, her gaze steady. That's exactly why you're perfect. Outside, snow began to fall again. Quiet, gentle, like a curtain drawing closed on one chapter and slowly rising on another. Elliot looked out the window, then back at her. Something old in his heart stirred, something he'd buried beneath routine silence and time. I'll think about it, he said finally. She nodded. That's all I ask. And as she stood to leave, scarf in hand, she paused in the doorway and turned to look at him one more time. You once gave me shelter when the world didn't. Maybe now we can give it to others. Together. Then she was gone again, leaving behind only the warmth of her words and the quiet echo of hope. The next morning, Elliot found himself standing in front of the wooden box before he even realized what he was doing. His garage was quiet, too quiet maybe. The heater ticked in the corner, trying its best to warm the space. But the chill in the air came from somewhere else. A restlessness, a memory knocking. He ran his hand along the top of the box the same way Lena had the day before. It was just a box, scuffed, dusty, made of old pine and metal corners. But to Elliot, it was a capsule, a place where things stayed preserved, untouched by time. He opened the lid. The red scarf lay inside, folded just as he'd left it, frayed at the edges, faded from bright crimson to the hue of old wine. But it still carried the faintest scent, maybe imagined now, of wood smoke and winter. He took it out and held it for a long time. He hadn't realized how much it meant to him until he saw her holding it again. He'd kept it not because he expected to see her again, but because it reminded him of something good he'd done when life had felt heavy and full of things he couldn't fix. Later that day, a young man with a dented pickup rolled into the garage needing a new alternator. Elliot fixed it like he fixed everything, methodically, silently, with hands that never rushed. But his mind wasn't on the engine. It was on Wayfinder. And Lena. She'd asked him to help, to teach, to step into a world he didn't think he belonged in anymore. Elliot didn't consider himself someone who changed lives. He fixed things, yes. Machines, engines, rusted bolts. But people were delicate, complex, the kind of broken you couldn't fix with a socket wrench and elbow grease. Still, her words echoed. You once gave me shelter when the world didn't. Maybe now we can give it to others. Together. He tightened a bolt and looked out at the snow slowly falling again, as if the world was resetting itself flake by flake. That evening, he sat down at the small kitchen table behind the garage. A sandwich, a thermos of soup. The same meal he'd had every Thursday for as long as he could remember. But something about it tasted different now. He unfolded the scarf and laid it across the table like a thread connecting two timelines. His wife Marjorie had once asked about it. Whose is this, she'd asked years ago when cleaning out the shelf above his tools. Just something a kid left behind. Long time ago. She must have mattered. She did. She does. Marjorie hadn't asked again. She understood the way some women do without words, without jealousy. She had only smiled softly and folded the scarf carefully, placing it back in the box. The next morning, Elliot made a decision. He brushed snow off the windshield of his battered Chevy and drove across town toward an address Lena had scribbled on the back of his invoice receipt, Wayfinder Community Center, 12th and Cottonwood. The building was modest, red brick, flat roof, small blue letters above the door. A white van sat in the lot, its side painted with a faded compass logo and the words, "Everyone deserves a direction." Elliot parked and hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The warmth hit him first. Not from the heat, though it was well heated. No, this warmth came from the soft voices in the hallway, the laughter in the distant common room, the quiet energy of life rebuilding itself. A young man at the front desk, early 20s, dreadlocks, glasses, looked up and smiled. "Can I help you, sir?" Elliot cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Lena Maddox. She's in the workshop. Down the hall, last door on the right." Elliot followed the sound of muffled chatter and clinking tools. The room smelled of sawdust, oil, and potential. Lena stood at a bench, sleeves rolled up, guiding a girl no older than 16 through the steps of replacing a bike chain. She turned when she saw Elliot, and her whole face lit up. "You came," she said, smiling, stepping closer. He held up the scarf. "I figured I owed this a new story." She looked at the scarf, then back at him. "And you?" He met her eyes, serious. "I'm not a teacher. I don't do speeches. I won't babysit kids who don't want to learn." She nodded slowly, but he added, "If someone wants to learn to fix things, really learn, I'll be here." Lena's smile softened. "That's all I was hoping for." She introduced him to the group, 6 teens in total, ranging from 15 to 20. A few raised eyebrows. One kid, tall and lanky, muttered, "He looks like he doesn't even text." Elliot looked straight at him. "You want to learn to rebuild a carburetor or not?" The kid blinked, then grinned. "Yes, sir." That afternoon, Elliot stood beside a table covered in old lawnmower parts, mismatched sockets, and rusted chains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, he felt useful in a way that went beyond engines. He was passing on something that didn't come with a price tag: skill, patience, pride in doing things right even when no one was watching. Across the room, Lena watched from the doorway, scarf draped around her neck. She wasn't smiling. She was glowing. Later, as they locked up together, she turned to him beneath the porch light. "Thank you." Elliot shook his head. "You're the one doing something big here. I'm just the guy with tools." Lena paused, looked at him. "No. You're the guy who never threw away a scarf." And Elliot, for once, didn't have a response. Just a quiet look that said, some things are worth holding on to. As they stepped into the night, the scarf fluttered gently in the wind. And behind them, the workshop lights stayed warm, ready for another day. The garage had seen many winters, but none etched into Elliot's memory quite like the one 20 years ago. Now standing in the Wayfinder workshop, surrounded by humming lights and the clatter of tools in young hands, he was pulled backward in time by the way Lena moved, her quiet steadiness, the way she knelt beside a struggling teen without talking down to them. It was the same calm he remembered in her eyes that snowy night, even though she'd been just a girl, frightened and shaking. After the session, the teens filed out one by one. Elliot stayed behind, wiping oil from his fingers with a rag, pretending not to wait for her. Lena lingered near the old vise on the workbench, the red scarf still looped neatly around her neck. "You remembered everything," she said softly. He looked up. "Some things stay, whether you want them to or not." She crossed her arms, not as a barrier, but as if she were steadying herself. "I want to tell you the whole story. About that night." Elliot nodded and leaned back against the bench. "I think I need to hear it." She started slowly, like someone tracing footprints in deep snow. "It was 2 days before Christmas. I'd just run away again, 3rd time in a year. My foster father had been drinking, and it was just one time too many. I walked until my feet bled, thinking I'd head for the highway." Her voice faltered, and she rubbed the heel of one hand against her temple, as if trying to hold the memory together. "I got lost in the woods. Snow started falling harder. I hadn't eaten in over a day. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where they'll find me in spring." Elliot's chest tightened. She was standing right here, whole and strong, and still the picture she painted made the air feel thinner. But then she said, her voice lightening, "There was this glowing light in the trees. I thought it was heaven. A wry smile tugged at her lips. Turned out to be your garage. He chuckled once softly. You opened the door like you weren't surprised to see a half-frozen kid on your porch. I wasn't, he replied. Not sure why. Maybe it's that I'd been hoping someone would knock who needed something more than a muffler change. She nodded. You didn't ask questions. You didn't treat me like trouble. You just wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like motor oil and cinnamon-made cocoa and let me sleep. I remember the chair creaked every time I shifted, and you just kept adjusting the heater like you'd done this 100 times before. I hadn't, Elliot said, but you looked like someone who needed things to feel normal, so I pretended they were. She sat on the edge of the workbench across from him, hands clasped loosely in her lap. When the officer came in the morning, she continued, I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. You didn't say much, just walked me to the car and waited. I turned around in the back seat and I thought I saw you wave. I did. Lena smiled through the mist in her eyes. I didn't even know your name, but that night, it became the compass point I used for everything after. Every time I thought the world was only made of hard people, I remembered the man who kept the cocoa warm and never asked what I'd done. Elliot looked down, rubbing a grease-stained thumb over his palm. I didn't think I did enough. You saved my life, she said plainly, not just from the cold, from disappearing. There was a long silence between them, not uncomfortable, just full, heavy with what had been and what might still come. Elliot finally broke it. Why now, after all these years? She inhaled deeply. Because I'm finally standing on solid ground, and because I always meant to find you. I just didn't know how to carry both the past and the present at once. He nodded slowly. It's strange. I kept that scarf all these years. My wife once found it. She asked about it, and I couldn't even explain it properly. I knew it mattered. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. It's the only thing anyone ever kept of mine. A door creaked open down the hall. One of the teens peeked inside, then vanished again. Voices echoed faintly, but the moment between Elliot and Lena held its own gravity. Do you know what I think about sometimes? She asked. He shook his head. I wonder what might have happened if I'd been placed with a different family, or if I hadn't made it to your door that night. You did, Elliot said simply, and you're here now. She looked at him then, not as the man who had saved her or the mentor she'd invited into her center, but as a man with quiet eyes who never turned away from pain. And Elliot looked back, really looked, seeing not the girl from the snow, but the woman she'd become. Someone who had walked through fire and come out carrying buckets of water for others. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window slightly. Elliot glanced at the scarf around her neck, the same one that had been frozen stiff 20 years ago, now resting softly over her collarbone. He stood slowly, stretched, and exhaled. You're doing something good here, Lena. Real good. She looked around the room. So are you. I know you don't see it yet, but you belong here too. I'm not used to belonging anywhere, he said, half smiling. Then maybe this is where that changes. As they left the workshop, together stepping out into the brisk evening air, the last traces of sunset bled orange across the horizon. Snowflakes danced lazily from a sky already turning deep blue. Lena stopped at the curb and turned to face him. I'm glad you kept the scarf. Elliot met her eyes. I'm glad you came back for it. They stood in silence, the kind that doesn't rush or demand. Then she stepped closer, not too close, but just enough for her voice to carry warmly. I don't believe in accidents anymore, just in people who hold on when it matters. She didn't wait for a response this time. She just walked away into the snow glow, leaving Elliot standing there with something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not duty, something closer to hope. Monday morning arrived with a pale sky and a stillness that hinted at the season deepening. Elliot stood in his garage longer than usual, hands idle, thoughts circling the conversation from Friday like moths to a porch light. He hadn't been back to the Wayfinder Center since. Lena hadn't pushed. She hadn't called or dropped by. And somehow that made him think about her more. The red scarf, now gently folded on his workbench, seemed to hum with quiet memory. He found himself staring at it more often than he'd like to admit. He wasn't a man who jumped into things. Never had been. But something about Lena's presence, her certainty without pressure, her offer without demand, had begun to loosen bolts in his soul he didn't even know were rusted shut. That afternoon, Elliot found himself driving again to the address on Cottonwood Street. He parked in the same space as before, took the same quiet breath before stepping inside. This time the young man at the front desk greeted him with familiarity. "Mr. Ward," he said, grinning. "They're in the back again. Good timing. One of the lawnmowers exploded in smoke this morning." Elliot arched an eyebrow. "Did it now?" "Not on purpose," the guy added quickly. "We think." Elliot smirked and walked down the hall. The workshop was lively this time. 3 teens hovered around a busted engine on the center table. Wrenches clanked, someone dropped a nut and swore someone else laughed. Lena looked up from the corner and met Elliot's eyes. No surprise, no triumph, just a quiet smile. She handed the teen beside her a socket wrench and walked over. "I didn't know if you'd be back." "Neither did I," Elliot said. "But something told me this old place needed a real mechanic." Lena folded her arms, amused. "I'll try not to take that personally." He chuckled. "How's the patient?" He nodded toward the smoking lawnmower. She leaned in. Still on life support, but hopeful. They stood side by side watching the kids work. Elliot's eyes flicked over them, sharp but patient. The girl from last week, Marisol, was showing the others how to remove a spark plug. The tall boy, Jaden, was actually listening this time. Elliot turned slightly toward Lena. "They care more than they pretend." Lena nodded. "They're just afraid no one else does." Later, while the teens took a snack break, Elliot stayed behind checking over a set of tools that had been badly mistreated. Lena joined him quietly. She sat on the stool beside the bench, her eyes soft. "I meant what I said," she said. "This place needs someone like you." Elliot didn't look up. "I'm not used to being needed." "Well," she said gently, "maybe it's time that changed." He hesitated, then looked at her. "What made you start this?" Lena leaned back against the bench, exhaling slowly. "After I aged out of the system, I bounced around. Waitressing, warehouse gigs. Nothing stuck. Nothing felt like a home. But I kept thinking back to that night in your garage. How one kind gesture had given me enough to hold on to. So I thought, what if I could be that for someone else?" Elliot nodded, his voice low. "That's a rare kind of memory to turn into action." She glanced at him. "Not when it's all you've got." The conversation lingered in the air long after they both went quiet. Outside, the sky was turning to the silvery blue of early evening. The windows caught the dying light just enough to cast long shadows across the floor. Elliot shifted, leaning his elbows on the bench. "I've seen kids walk in and out of shops all my life. Most of them don't listen. They're either too angry or too distracted. Here," Lena said softly, "they're too scared." He looked at her. "They're scared that if they mess up once they're gone. They're scared no one's waiting for them at the end of the day. That no one remembers their name or birthday or favorite color." Her voice cracked a little on that last part. "They're scared," she finished, "that no one sees them." Elliot swallowed hard. "And you do." Lena looked at him, her eyes shining. "I try. The rest, I can't do alone." A long silence stretched between them before Elliot finally said, "I'm not good with speeches." She smiled. "You're here. That's enough." Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "A small stipend. Just something while you help out." He pushed it back gently. "Don't insult me." She blinked. "I wasn't." He met her eyes. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it for them, not for a paycheck." She studied him for a beat, then gave a small nod. "Understood." Elliot folded the paper, tucked it into the side of the workbench, and glanced back toward the now empty room. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll start teaching them about fuel mixtures. No more trial by fire." Lena laughed, her shoulders relaxing. "They're going to like you more than they admit." "I'm not here to be liked." "No," she said. "You're here to be remembered." As Elliot packed up, Lena walked him to the door. The hall was quiet now. Most of the kids had left for the evening. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, light this time, almost playful. Elliot opened the door, but hesitated before stepping through. "I've still got the scarf," he said. Lena looked at him, surprised. "I thought you gave it back." "I did, but then you left it on the chair before you left." "On purpose," she didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I think I wanted to know if you'd notice." "I did." She smiled. "Good night, Elliot." He nodded. "Good night, Lena." As he stepped out into the snow, he didn't feel cold. Not anymore. The first real snowstorm of the season arrived that Thursday, brushing Elk Hollow in slow, deliberate strokes. Outside, the town huddled in on itself, lights dim behind curtains, chimneys puffed quietly, tires hissed on slick roads. But inside the Wayfinder workshop, warmth pulsed from old radiators. The smell of engine oil hung in the air, and something else lingered quieter but stronger. Purpose. Elliot stood at the tool bench, sleeves rolled up, sweat dotting his temple, despite the chill in the room. His hands were black with grease, but he moved with calm certainty. Around him, 4 teens leaned in close, watching as he dismantled a battered alternator. "No, not like that," he said gently, nodding toward Marisol, who was holding a wrench like it was a weapon. "Let it rest in your palm. Feel its weight. Tools are like people. They'll work better if you respect them." Jaden snorted. "That's deep, man." "It's not deep," Elliot replied, not looking up. "It's just true." The kids exchanged glances but didn't argue. There was something about the way Elliot spoke, simple, grounded, that made even the skeptics quiet down. From the back of the room, Lena leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a soft smile warming her features. She hadn't said a word all evening, hadn't needed to. Watching Elliot work was like watching someone remember a language they hadn't spoken in years, hesitant at first, then fluent in the pauses between words. He caught her eye across the room. She nodded once, and he nodded back. Nothing was said. Everything was heard. After the students left, trailing boot prints and laughter into the night, Elliot stayed behind to clean up. He wiped down the benches, reorganized the socket sets, and lingered over the rows of worn-out tools like a man tucking in old friends. Lena returned with 2 steaming mugs and placed one on the bench beside him. "Chamomile," she said. "Figured it's safer than coffee at this hour." Elliot accepted it with a grunt that sounded like gratitude. They stood in silence for a while, sipping, listening to the snow whisper against the windows. "You were good with them tonight," she said softly. "I just taught them not to break things. You taught them not to be afraid to try." Elliot stared at the swirl of tea in his cup. "That's a lot to pin on a wrench." "It's not the wrench," Lena said. "It's the hands holding it." They moved to the corner of the room where an old radiator clicked quietly beneath a window. Lena sat in the leather chair. Yes, the same one from Elliot's garage, now transported here, like a relic with new purpose. She ran her fingers along the armrest. "It still creaks," she said, smiling. Elliot leaned on the windowsill beside her. "I didn't have the heart to leave it behind." A pause. "I'm glad you didn't." The snow outside was thicker now, coating the parked cars and sidewalks. The street lamps cast halos of golden light that made everything look softer, as if time had slowed just enough to catch its breath. "Can I ask something?" Lena said, breaking the quiet. Elliot looked down at her. "Why did you keep it?" she asked. "The scarf." He hesitated, then spoke low and steady. "Because it reminded me of the night I did something right. And because I wanted to remember that even when things fall apart sometimes, you can still be useful. You just don't always get to see how." Lena blinked quickly. "You saw it tonight." He nodded. "Maybe. You made them feel seen." He glanced at her. "So did you." They shared a long look, not romantic, not yet, but real, deep, laced with the kind of trust that doesn't ask to be earned in one day, but builds slow and solid. Lena curled her legs under her in the chair. "You know, I used to imagine what it would have been like if I'd stayed, if I'd run back to your garage instead of the officer's car. I used to think about living there, you teaching me how to fix things, maybe letting me sweep floors in exchange for cocoa." "You wouldn't have liked the cocoa," Elliot said deadpan. "It came from a packet." She laughed. The sound filled the room like firelight. He smiled, then sobered. "I wouldn't have known what to do with a kid back then. I barely knew how to take care of myself. You took care of me. You were there for one night, and that was enough." Silence returned again, but it wasn't empty. It hummed with possibility. Eventually, Lena rose and walked toward the coat rack. She picked up her scarf, not the red one, but another newer, and wrapped it around her neck. "Storm's getting worse," she said. "I should head out before the roads ice over." Elliot followed her to the door. "Drive slow," he said. She smiled at the simplicity of it. "You always did know how to say exactly what was needed." He opened the door for her. The wind rushed in sharp and biting. She braced against it, pulling her coat tighter. Then, without warning, she turned back and reached into her pocket. She pressed something into his palm. The red scarf. I left it behind once, she said. But this time I'm giving it to you. Elliot looked down at it, then up at her. I don't need it anymore, Lena said. I'm not lost anymore. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. He just nodded and she smiled one last time before disappearing into the storm. Elliot closed the door behind her and stood there, the scarf in his hands, the silence of the room folding around him. And for the first time in many years, he didn't feel like a man who'd been left behind. He felt like someone being trusted again, someone finally beginning to return home. The next morning, Elliot arrived at the workshop early. Too early if he were being honest with himself. The kids wouldn't show up for another hour, and Lena, well, he wasn't sure if she'd be in at all. But the moment he'd rolled over in bed and seen the red scarf on the chair across the room, something had stirred in him. It wasn't guilt. It was purpose. The kind he hadn't felt since Marjorie passed. The kind that made coffee taste sharper and the cold air feel more like a challenge than a punishment. He turned on the lights, started the old furnace, and began rearranging the tool shelves. The socket sets were a mess, half-stripped, mismatched, stacked like someone was playing Jenga with hardware. It was a small thing, but he needed the world to make sense again, starting with 10-millimeter sockets. By mid-morning, Lena walked in with snow still dusting her shoulders. She looked tired more than usual, but smiled when she saw him. Early bird, she said. I live 10 minutes away. You live in that garage. He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. She walked to the workbench and set down her laptop bag, then exhaled in that way people do when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long. Elliot noticed. You all right? Lena hesitated. We lost a grant this morning. One of the big ones. City Council redirected funds to a housing project across town. Elliot frowned. I thought you had support lined up. We did, but the new guy running the budget office doesn't think teaching kids how to fix engines contributes to upward mobility. He scoffed. So we should hand them college pamphlets and pretend that'll fix everything. Lena looked down. I'm meeting with donors next week, but if that doesn't go well, how bad we'll have to cut 2 of the afternoon programs, and probably close weekends. Elliot leaned on the bench, jaw tightening. That's half your kids. I know. The weight of it settled between them. This place had become more than just walls and workbenches. It was a hinge in 100 lives, holding open the door between survival and something better. Elliot looked around the room now, warmed by the old furnace. Just yesterday, Jaden had finally fixed a motor on his own. Marisol had shown another girl how to change oil filters. They weren't just learning machines. They were learning control. Take my garage, Elliot said suddenly. Lena blinked. What, sell this space? Cut rent? Move the program to my place. The garage has more square footage, better equipment, and it's paid off. I'll clear out the old bay. We can insulate it better. I know a guy who owes me a favor. He can help run wiring. Lena stared at him, stunned. You'd give that up? He shrugged. It's just a building. This, he gestured around them. This is living. Lena stepped closer, searching his eyes. Elliot, that's your home. That was her dream. Marjorie. It landed between them like a name still sacred. Elliot's eyes softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. Then Marjorie wanted the garage to mean something. It stopped meaning anything when she died. But this, I think she'd have liked this. Lena's throat tightened. You're sure I'm tired of fixing things that don't matter? They stood in stillness, grief and hope, mixing like oil and water in the space between them. Then Lena reached out and gently placed her hand over his. Her voice was quiet. If we move there, it becomes our work. Together. He met her gaze. Then let's get started. By noon, the teens were trickling in, unaware that the floor beneath their feet might soon change. Elliot didn't say anything, no sense in letting uncertainty rattle what was working. Instead, he dove into teaching with a calm intensity. They rebuilt a chainsaw motor, took apart an old go-kart engine. Jaden burned his hand on a hot spark plug and tried to play it cool. Marisol rolled her eyes and tossed him a glove. It was messy, loud, smelled like sweat, rust, and rubber. It was perfect. Later that day, Elliot stood in the storage closet pulling down a rusted toolbox that hadn't been touched in years. As he opened it, a folded piece of paper slipped out and landed at his feet. He picked it up. It was a letter, faded, creased in half, his name written across the front in Marjorie's handwriting. His heart stopped. He didn't even remember keeping this. With trembling fingers, he unfolded it. Elliot, If you're reading this, it means I'm probably gone. I hope it's a long time from now. But just in case, don't let the quiet make you believe the best years are behind you. You're meant to keep building things. Not just with your hands, with your heart too. Find something worth pouring it into again. Someone, maybe. Love always, Marge. He stood frozen for a long time, letter trembling slightly in his hands. The noise outside faded. The years folded inward like pages of a book closing gently. That evening, he handed the letter to Lena without a word. She read it once, then again slower. When she looked up, her eyes shimmered. She knew. Elliot nodded. She always did. The last light of the day was fading. Lena stood at the window, arms crossed. Do you think she'd be okay with me being here? She asked quietly. Elliot stepped beside her. I think she'd be mad it took me this long. They both laughed soft and low, the kind of laughter that comes not from jokes, but from being seen. As night fell, the snow began again, dusting the street in quiet white. Inside, the lights of the workshop stayed on. Hope, it seemed, was just beginning to find its new foundation, built not only on concrete and wood, but on bones and rust, grief and grace, and the steady, unexpected return of love. The next morning, Elliot opened the garage doors, not to the quiet of solitude, but to the bustle of purpose. A light snow still hung in the air, falling slow as ash, and the ground crunched beneath his boots as he crossed to the side shed, Marjorie's old garden room. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside, flower pots sat stacked and forgotten. A wooden table once used to pot seedlings was now layered in dust and spider silk. But Elliot didn't see a shed anymore. He saw a classroom, a bench for teaching, space to store tools, a warm place for the kids to breathe. It was happening. This place, his place, was going to live again. By mid-morning, Lena arrived with a folder full of paperwork and a thermos of strong coffee. I called the city inspector, she said, handing him the cup. We'll need to insulate the rear wall, and the electric box needs an upgrade before we can run full hours. But he seemed optimistic. Elliot took a sip, nodded. I can do the wiring myself. Might take a few days. She watched him closely. You okay? He paused, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her, the letter. Her fingers hesitated before she opened it. She didn't read it again. She didn't have to. The memory of Marjorie's words still clung to her from the night before like perfume on old fabric. I've thought about her a lot, Lena said, voice low. Even before you gave me this. I used to imagine what kind of woman she must have been. Elliot's eyes softened. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like you were already forgiven, before you even said a word. Lena nodded slowly, then looked around the garage. You built this life for her. I did, he said. And for a long time after she passed, I thought the best thing I could do was not change a thing, as if preserving it would honor her. Lena turned to him. But maybe honoring her means letting it change, letting it grow. Elliot met her gaze. Maybe that's what she meant. Build something new, with your heart. They stood in silence, the kind that hums like an old song neither of them had heard in years. That afternoon, the teens arrived early, stomping snow off their boots. Cheeks flushed red with cold. Marisol came in carrying a box of donated spark plugs. Jaden shoved an old muffler under one arm like a trophy. You moving us here for real? He asked, glancing around. Elliot nodded. This is your new shop. The kids let out a cheer, half surprised, half relieved. Elliot noticed how they walked differently once they realized this space was theirs. Shoulders a little straighter, eyes a little brighter. Ownership, even in small things, could change a life. In the corner of the garage, Elliot hung a new pegboard. One by one, he placed each tool with care. Not just for function, but as invitation. These weren't just instruments anymore. They were promises. Marisol came over and traced a finger along the outline of a wrench. I used to think tools were just junk, she said. Now they feel like keys. Elliot gave her a half smile. That's 'cause they are. Late that evening, long after the teens had left, Lena stayed behind to help Elliot sweep out the back room. Dust filled the air in golden clouds under the overhead light. Elliot leaned on the broom handle, watching her. You tired? He asked. She looked at him over her shoulder, a strand of hair falling across her cheek. Always, he chuckled. You hide it well. I've had practice. She stopped sweeping and leaned against the wall, the broom braced loosely beside her. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, stayed focused enough, the fear would go away. The fear that everything I've built will disappear overnight. Elliot nodded, understanding too well. That fear never really leaves. But it gets smaller when someone else is standing beside you. She glanced at him. That what you're doing? I think so. Lena didn't speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, it means something. That you're here, that you're letting this place change. Elliot looked at the room, at the shadows and light, at the red scarf hanging from a hook on the wall, like a quiet witness to everything unfolding. I think it's changing me too, he said. Before leaving, Lena stepped into the office, a cramped space off the main floor, with a desk that hadn't been used since Marjorie kept the books. She opened the bottom drawer, hoping to find a clipboard or an old ledger. Instead, she found a photograph. It was worn and slightly curled at the edges. A black and white snapshot of Marjorie and Elliot standing in front of the garage, both young, both laughing. Between them, a girl not quite 14, wrapped in a wool coat and a crooked red scarf. She looked like she wasn't sure how to smile yet. Lena's throat tightened. She knew that face. She knew the moment. It was her. Taken that morning before the police arrived, before she was taken away. Elliot had taken a picture and kept it. She walked out into the garage, slowly holding the photo in both hands. Elliot turned when he saw her. I found this, she said. He looked down at it. For a long time, he said nothing. Then I took it so I wouldn't forget that you were real. That it happened. Lena stared at the picture, then at him. You remembered me before I remembered myself. You never left, he said. Not really. She stepped forward and they stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at a moment from 20 years ago, now resurrected. Lena whispered, you kept the scarf, you kept the photo, you even kept the chair. Elliot smiled faintly. Some things are worth keeping. They stood there a while longer, two people surrounded by rust and dust and second chances, not saying anything more, not needing to. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in silence. Inside, a life was being rebuilt, one memory, one wrench, one wordless understanding at a time. The first Saturday class in Elliot's garage came with wind and flurries, but that didn't stop the kids from showing up early. By 8:30, boots thudded across the concrete floor, and the hum of teenage voices filled the space like the sound of an engine warming up. Elliot stood by the long center bench, arms folded, watching Jaden and Marisol argue over the correct torque setting for a spark plug. Lena leaned against the tool cabinet, sipping coffee from a dented travel mug. The old garage had never been louder or more alive. It felt right. No more than that. It felt earned. At around mid-morning, Elliot took Jaden aside and handed him a clipboard. Your lead on this, he said, nodding toward a rusted-out go-kart someone had donated. Assign tasks, troubleshoot the issues, treat it like it's yours. Jaden blinked. You serious? Elliot gave a small nod. You keep talking like you're the boss. Let's see if you can act like one. The boy straightened, pride and fear clashing in his eyes. He nodded once, then turned to his peers. All right, he said, trying to sound authoritative. We're tearing this thing down. Marisol, you're on intake. Leo grabbed the diagram from the desk. Elliot stepped back, arms crossed, hiding a smirk. Lena appeared at his side. You're good at that. At what? Letting go just enough, he grunted. He's got the makings. Just needs room to fail a few times. And to get back up. Elliot glanced at her. That's where we come in. By noon, the garage smelled like hot metal and chili. Marisol had convinced Lena to bring a crock pot for lunch. The students gathered around the folding table, paper bowls and hand grease on their cheeks. Laughter rippled through the room. For a moment, they weren't broken or angry or behind in life. They were just kids. After the meal, Elliot returned to a quiet corner of the garage. An old pickup truck sat there. Faded green hood popped open. Lena followed him, curious. I don't think I've seen this one run since we got here, she said. It doesn't, Elliot replied. Belonged to a neighbor down the road. Gave it to me years ago. Figured I'd get around to fixing it. Lena peered into the engine bay. It's got potential. He smiled. That's what I keep telling it. She leaned closer, brushing snowflakes from the side mirror. You thinking of using it for something? Elliot hesitated. Then almost shyly, I was thinking it might be a good project for one of the kids to restore. Start to finish. Something they can see come to life. Lena looked at him, eyes soft. That's a beautiful idea. Elliot cleared his throat. I was also thinking maybe you could help pick who gets to lead it. Her brow lifted slightly. You're asking me to make the call. He met her gaze. You see more than I do. Lena smiled. I'd be honored. As the students filed out for the day, waving goodbye and making promises to come back early Monday, Elliot stayed behind to tidy the bench. Lena lingered too, her scarf looped loosely around her neck. She picked up a wrench and turned it in her hand. Funny how these used to terrify me. They're just metal, Elliot said. No, she replied. They're symbols of things I didn't think I could understand, of a world I thought I didn't belong to. He turned toward her. And now, she said, I think I want to learn more. Elliot handed her a socket wrench. Then let's teach you. He walked her through the basics, ratcheting motion, socket sizes, how to brace your wrist. Her fingers were tentative at first, then more confident. At one point, she paused. You remember the first time I watched you fix something? He glanced at her. I remember a half-frozen kid curled in a chair, trying to act like she wasn't scared. I watched you from that chair, she said. Your hands steady, your face focused. I remember thinking I wish someone would take care of me the way he takes care of that engine. Elliot went still. Lena continued. You didn't say much, but everything about you said this matters. Even if it's small, even if it's broken, it matters. She looked up. And I never forgot that. He reached for a rag, more to keep his hands moving than anything else. I didn't think I had anything left to offer after Marge died, he said. I fixed cars, paid bills, kept my head down. But something about this place, about these kids, and you, it's waking something back up. She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we're both waking up. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Lena picked up the wrench again. Show me how to loosen this bolt. Elliot leaned in, their hands brushed. He didn't pull away. Later, as Lena slipped on her coat, Elliot held the door for her. Snow had stopped falling. The clouds had cleared, revealing a deep violet sky and stars beginning to blink awake. She turned at the threshold. I never got to say it properly. He raised an eyebrow. Say what? Thank you. For letting me back in. For building something with me. He looked down, then up again. Thank you for showing up in the first place. She smiled soft and full. Then she walked into the night. Elliot stood at the doorway a moment longer, one hand on the wrench, still resting on the bench. Outside, the stars shone bright over the old garage. Inside, something old was beginning again. Not fixed, not finished, but alive. The first clear day after the snowstorm brought the kind of sunlight that made everything look gentler than it really was. The streets of Elk Hollow sparkled under a thin glaze of melting frost, and the garage, once known only for mufflers and misfires, hummed with anticipation. Elliot stood just inside the bay doors, watching as the last banner was fastened above the entryway, Wayfinder Community Rebuild Day. It had been Lena's idea, an open house to thank donors, invite neighbors, and show the town what the kids had built. Elliot hadn't wanted the attention, but now looking around at the setup, the folding chairs, the workstations polished to a shine, the photo board on the far wall, he felt something he hadn't in years: pride. By mid-morning, the garage filled with warmth, not just from the portable heaters, but from the noise. Music played from an old speaker, children from the neighborhood darted between displays, and the teens stood beside their workstations like proud artisans ready to explain their projects. Jaden hovered beside the half-restored go-kart fielding, questions from a middle-aged couple in fleece vests. Marisol stood near the tool bench, demonstrating how to strip a wire for a curious teenager and his mom. Elliot moved among them, nodding, adjusting, offering the occasional word of encouragement. But mostly he just watched and listened. A girl who'd once refused to make eye contact was now explaining valve timing to a crowd of 3. A boy who used to slump in his chair now stood tall beside a donated generator he'd rebuilt from scratch. This wasn't charity. This was dignity. Lena found Elliot near the back of the garage where the photo display stretched along the plywood wall. Dozens of images, before and after shots, group photos, Polaroids of kids holding wrenches like trophies, told the story of the program. At the center hung one special photo, black and white, slightly faded. Elliot, Marjorie, a young Lena. The caption read, "Where it started. Winter 2005. Lena stood quietly beside him. You okay? Elliot took a breath. I think I am. She smiled. People showed up. They did. I even saw Mayor Harlan sneak in. Elliot grunted. Hope he brought his checkbook. Lena laughed, then fell silent again. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we never crossed paths again? He looked at her. I think I would have gone on fixing things that didn't matter. And you would have built something amazing without ever knowing who helped you start it. Her voice was soft. It mattered. You mattered. They stood there a moment, not needing more than that. As the afternoon wore on, the energy in the garage grew. The students gave demonstrations, offered guided tours, even handed out hand-drawn brochures. Elliot watched with quiet amazement as Marisol spoke in front of an entire group of parents, sharing her journey from suspension-prone high schooler to confident apprentice. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness, then applause. Lena leaned over. She wrote that speech herself. I believe it. Later, a boy Elliot had never seen before approached him, holding a paper plate piled with cookies. Are you Mr. Ward? Elliot nodded. My sister's in the program. Said you taught her how to fix a carburetor. Then your sister's smarter than most grown men I know. The boy grinned. Can I join next session? Elliot looked over at Lena, who gave a small nod. Yeah, Elliot said. You can. As the day wound down, people began to leave, shaking hands, exchanging thank yous and offering promises to return. The garage slowly returned to quiet. The sun dipped low, casting long golden lines across the floor. Lena sat on the edge of the old leather chair, the red scarf folded neatly in her lap. Elliot leaned on the bench beside her, his hands smudged with grease and frosting from a cupcake he hadn't meant to eat. You ever think this place would feel like home again, she asked. He looked around. It never stopped being home, he said. It just forgot how to breathe. Lena turned to him. And now? Now it's alive. She smiled. We did good today. You did good. No, she said firmly. We did, and so did they. She nodded toward the kids still lingering outside, laughing and helping fold chairs. They're not just learning how to fix engines, she continued. They're learning how to hold their own weight, how to belong. Elliot studied her. The set of her jaw, the softness in her eyes, the way she said, belong, like it was sacred. You know, he said, Marge used to say the hardest part of fixing something isn't finding what's broken, it's trusting it can run again. Lena looked up at him. Do you? I do. She stood and walked toward the back wall where a small shelf now held photos, thank you notes and scraps of mementos from the garage's history. She reached for an empty frame and held it up. We should fill this one next, she said, with what she looked at him, with whatever comes next. As the last of the lights dimmed, Elliot walked her to the door. The sky was painted in lavender and deep blue, the kind of dusk that comes just before the stars appear. Lena paused on the threshold. Do you ever think second chances are wasted on people like us, she asked. Elliot didn't hesitate. No. I think second chances are meant for people like us. She nodded slowly. Then she did something she hadn't done since the day she returned. She reached out, took his hand. Just for a moment. And then she let go, stepped into the quiet evening, and disappeared down the sidewalk. Elliot stood in the doorway, watching until she turned the corner. One hand still holding the memory. One heart learning after all this time how to let it beat with something more than repair. How to beat with hope. The first flakes of March snow fell quietly, as if reluctant to interrupt the peace that had settled over the garage. Inside, the smell of pine-scented cleaner, mixed with engine oil and sunlight, filtered through the dusty windows, painting long stripes across the concrete floor. Elliot stood at the back workbench, staring down at a new ignition coil and a set of engine belts. But his hands weren't moving. He was waiting, not for a part, for her. Lena hadn't come to the garage that morning. She'd sent a quick text meeting at the county office. Big update. I'll fill you in. But that was hours ago, and Elliot had started glancing at the door every 10 minutes. He'd never say it out loud, but her absence made the room feel unfinished. It wasn't just that they worked well together now, or that she had a way of navigating chaos with that quiet, steel-spine calm. It was the fact that Elliot had gotten used to her laughter mixing with the clank of tools, her insight softening his silence, her presence filling the spaces Marjorie used to anchor. He hadn't expected this, but it had grown quietly and without permission, like wildflowers in sidewalk cracks. Just after noon, the front door opened, and the familiar rhythm of Lena's boots crossed the floor. Elliot didn't turn. He just said, You're late. She stepped up beside him, breath visible from the chill. You'll forgive me when you hear what I've got. He glanced at her. She was glowing, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a spark behind her eyes as if something had finally clicked into place. Well, he said, setting down the coil. Let's hear it. Lena pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and laid it on the bench. Elliot leaned closer. It was a letterhead from the Elk Hollow Community Redevelopment Council. His eyes skimmed the page. His breath caught. They approved the expansion. She nodded. All of it. The second bay, the classroom space, even the community garden behind the garage. Full grant. Full backing. He stared at her. How I made them see what this place really is, Lena said. Not a charity. Not a repair shop. A place where broken things become whole again, people included. Elliot let out a slow exhale. You did that? No, she said softly. We did. They stood there, the paper between them like a covenant. The future wasn't just possible, now it was official. Elliot tapped the page. It's going to be a lot of work. Lena smiled. You say that like it's news. He chuckled, then hesitated. This changes everything. Yes, she said, but not the important things. He looked at her carefully. And what's important? Her voice was quiet. That you're here, that we're doing this together. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of good news. The kids arrived after school and Lena gathered them in the old office, now cleaned, painted, filled with secondhand chairs and plans pinned to every wall. She handed out printed schematics for the new training room. Marisol gasped at the garden idea. Jaden asked if he could help paint. Leo, the quietest of the bunch, offered to build the benches. Elliot stood in the doorway and watched them. And something settled in his chest, something that felt a lot like belonging. That night after the kids had gone and the sun had slipped behind the hills, Lena stayed behind again. She was reorganizing the shelves while Elliot wiped down the workbenches. Big day, she said. Elliot nodded. Bigger than I thought possible. She reached for the red scarf still hanging on the hook near the door and folded it neatly. You know what I kept thinking during that council meeting? What I wish Marjorie could see this. Elliot stilled. She'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of you, Lena said, for letting it all begin again. He didn't answer right away. Then he turned to her. You remember that day you walked in here the first time he asked? Lena smiled. You mean when I stared at that old box like it was a treasure chest? He nodded. I didn't know then what I was opening. I think you did, she said gently. You just weren't ready to believe in what might come after. Elliot's voice dropped. I'm starting to believe now. Lena stepped forward, scarf still in her hands. Then believe in this too. She hesitated, then reached out and placed the scarf around his neck, pulling it lightly so that it settled against his chest. Elliot looked down at the wool, then up into her eyes. You sure? He asked. I've never been more sure, she said. This doesn't belong to who I was. It belongs to who I became because of you. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow danced in the amber glow of the street lamp. But inside the garage, everything was still, warm, safe. Elliot took her hand not with hesitation, not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years fixing broken things and finally realized some things were never broken at all, just waiting for the right hands to hold them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The scarf was around his neck. Her hand was in his. And tomorrow they'd begin again, together. This time not as strangers, but as something closer to home. Spring arrived in Elk Hollow, not with a bang, but with a slow, generous unfolding. The snow melted into soil, rich with promise. Daffodils pushed through the thawed ground beside the garage, and the trees along Main Street dusted themselves in pale green. People opened windows again. Laughter returned to sidewalks. The air, for the first time in a long time, carried the scent of things beginning. Inside Elliot's garage, their garage, now the transformation was complete. The old muffler signs had been replaced with framed photos of the students' tools, lined the walls with pride, and a fresh coat of blue-gray paint stretched from the bay doors to the back office. But the soul of the place that remained the same warmth in the cold, steady hands, in a shaky world, quiet kindness tucked into every corner. At the center of the back wall, hanging on a walnut plaque beneath a single warm light, was the scarf. the same red scarf that had once been damp with snow and trembling hands. Now preserved, honored, and framed in clear glass. Below it, engraved in brass, kindness never disappears. It just finds its way home. The grand reopening of Wayfinder had drawn more people than anyone expected. Donors came wide-eyed and impressed. Neighbors dropped off baked goods and lingered for hours. A reporter from the Elk Hollow Gazette scribbled notes while Jaden gave a tour like a seasoned foreman. Marisol organized a hands-on demo for the kids, letting them rebuild small bike engines in teams. And Lena moved through it all with the grace of someone who no longer had to chase belonging. She had built it. She had lived it, and it had found her back. In the middle of the afternoon, Elliot stood near the back of the garage, sipping lemonade from a paper cup, wearing a shirt that Lena had teased him into ironing. He watched the crowd listen to the rhythm of joy and marveled at how the same space once defined by silence now breathed with life. A small boy tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Elliot," he turned. The boy pointed at the scarf. "Did you really keep it that long?" Elliot smiled, kneeling to his height. "I did." Why? Elliot thought for a second. "Because I believed someone would come back for it." The boy nodded, serious. "I think that's brave." Elliot chuckled. "Maybe, or maybe I just knew it wasn't mine to let go of." As the sun began to lower behind the hills, casting a honeyed glow across the garage floor, Lena joined him near the photo wall. She looked tired but happy. The kind of tired that only comes from building something true. "You okay?" Elliot asked. She nodded. "Better than okay." They stood there for a long moment, watching the way people paused at the scarf, reading the inscription, reflecting. Some smiled. Some touched the glass. Some just stared quietly, as if remembering their own moment of kindness long ago. Lena turned toward him. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous," he teased. She elbowed him gently. "I want to start a scholarship fund for kids who finish the program and want to pursue trade school or apprenticeships, not just to train them, but to launch them." Elliot's brow lifted, impressed. "What do you call it?" Her answer came without hesitation. "The Marjorie Fund." Elliot's voice softened. "She'd like that." "She'd love it," Lena said. He reached over and took her hand. Not for reassurance, not for steadiness, just because it felt right. Lena looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. "Do you think this is what she meant?" Who? He asked. "Marjorie. When she wrote you that letter, build something new, with your heart. Do you think she meant this place?" Elliot considered. "I think she meant us. This. All of it." Lena's eyes glistened. "Then I'm glad I came back." "I'm glad you left the scarf behind," he whispered. She laughed through the emotion. "I knew you'd keep it." "You trusted me," he said. "I did," she replied, and now he met her eyes. "Now I trust us." Outside, dusk deepened. A few stragglers said their goodbyes. The students began stacking chairs, carrying out trays, sweeping sawdust with the pride of people tending to their own home. Lena and Elliot stayed behind lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. They stood in front of the scarf one more time. Two people who had been lost. Two people who had built their way back. Not in grand heroic sweeps, but in small patient gestures. In cocoa and blankets. In socket wrenches and side glances. In shared grief and gentle beginnings. And now in quiet, unwavering love. Elliot brushed his fingers across the frame, then looked at Lena. "You ready for tomorrow?" She smiled. "I've never been more ready." He offered her his arm and she took it. Together they turned out the lights. The scarf remained behind, illuminated by a single lamp glowing like a lighthouse in the harbor of their story. And for the first time in many, many years, neither of them felt like something was missing. Because kindness had done what it always does. It had found its way home. And built something beautiful, where it mattered most. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It always warms our hearts to see this growing global community come together around these stories. If this story touched you or reminded you that kindness can change everything, please consider subscribing. We share stories like this every week, filled with hope, healing, and the quiet strength of good people. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep a little kindness in your pocket. You never know when someone might need it.